Well, Anna, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
First, how have you survived the summer with the children and the summer holidays? How's it all been?
Do you know what? Working has kept me sane. So I've had a book out in the middle of the summer holidays.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Read it,
which
it's
sounds
fantastic.
like terrible timing, but actually has been a real blessing in disguise because I have sorted myself out with a little bit of childcare and I've had time to focus and I've been out doing things like this. So it's broken it up a bit for me.
Yeah.
Everyone's sick of the sight of each other.
It's a bit weird for me because I've been listening to your audiobook that you narrate. And can I just ask you, your narration, it's very pure, natural and authentic. It's not just like you're reading the words. It's almost like that's when you wrote the book, is when it feels so real and authentic. What's your secret for that?
I think I wrote that book in 2 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
And there's a whole story behind that, which I'll happily tell you. But I sat down and it just poured out. It was like it's like a not like a love letter as such, but it's a bit of a stream of consciousness. So when I read it out, it was my words, just as I kind of typed, a bit edited. I mean, thank goodness.
And did you know it was going to be a book like as soon as you started typing?
I didn't have a book deal for that one. I was promoting another book called Raising a Happier Mother. And I was in Warwick doing a talk, and I was in a hotel with my mum, about to go for dinner. These moments are few and far between. And I had this idea suddenly for a book about the uncomfortable truths. So I wrote it down in my iPhone notes. This is like revealing my very much ADHD brain. In about 10 seconds, every chapter, including the colour of the book, which you've got bang on with the cushions here.
Yeah, we
Thank
matched
you.
that. We knew.
And I said to my literary agent, I've got to write this book. And he said, hold on, put it on ice. Let's get this other one out first. But I had to write it. So I said, I'm going to do it as a passion project. My publisher didn't even know because I was meant to write motherhood books. Well, that was the plan. And I was going to get up at 5 a.m. And write it over the summer holidays last year. And I went for a walk. And I suddenly had this real sense that I needed to write this book in 2 weeks. Like this real,
Just urge.
challenge, like a higher power, kind of like, Anna, you need to write this book in 2 weeks. And I went home and I said to my husband, I'm going to write that book in 2 weeks. And he was like, for the love of God, please don't do that. But I had to do it. So I did. I wrote this book in 2 weeks whilst the kids were at school, just kind of furiously typed it out. Publisher knew nothing about it. I finished it on the Sunday. And then on the Thursday, we had one of those life-altering curveballs of news kind of hit us. So I wouldn't have been able to write for ages as we just kind of navigated the grief and the trauma, the fallout of that. So when it came to speaking to my publisher about the next book, I was like, here you go. If you want it, I've done it. But the most amazing thing was that all these uncomfortable truths, the fact that bad things will happen, you'll lose people you love, you'll hurt people you love, all of these truths were so fresh, like in my mind, that it was so therapeutic that I'd just written it all out.
And you basically downloaded this from the universe, you channeled it, and this was your mission to go and henceforth tell everybody about these 10 uncomfortable truths. So let's go for it. Can you list the 10 uncomfortable truths for us?
Oh no, I've been asked this before and put on the spot. So they are, some people won't like, not in order. Okay, some people won't like you. You're going to fail. Bad things will happen. You'll hurt people you love. You'll lose people you love. You're going to die. You can't be present all the time. I've got 2 left. Is that 2 left?
Is it 3 left?
I think I was on 6.
I was on 8.
Well,
There you go.
this is
We
not a
got the
good
book
start.
down,
We
10's a lot. 10 is a lot.
10
to
is a
remember,
lot to remember.
the second chapter is all about fear of failure, right?
Yes.
And that for me has always been a big one, and it's driven a lot of past behaviours, and it's something that I've tried to take head on. How do these, for that chapter specifically, how does the fear of failure influence our day-to-day behaviour?
I think it can stifle us. I think often procrastination is actually down to a fear of failure. We want to get it right. We often approach things with kind of perfectionist, that sense of like, I've got to do this well. I've got to, as if our identity is somehow intertwined with the outcome. So if I fail at this, then that means I'm a failure. So often the cost is really high, because if we're going to do something and then we've got this internal dialogue that says you're rubbish, you failed, you could have done that better, then the cost of even trying is really high, right? Because we're going to get beaten up and criticised.
Yeah, that's something I think that I've adjusted with my internal dialogue, is not necessarily attaching success to outcomes, but attaching it to the process, no matter what. Even if the so-called outcome isn't what you initially set out or intended for, you've got some value back in the process and the journey of exploring whatever it is you're exploring with curiosity.
Yeah, because we don't really learn that much when things go straightforward, do we? It's in, you know, we've got the black and white, we've got the failing and the winning, but it's all in the messy middle, the grey area of it, which realistically, this is the bit that we live in.
Yes.
You know, this is the reality of life, is that we're in this kind of messy 50 shades of grey, and that's where we learn the stuff.
Life is the process.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound too cliched, but it's true,
It
isn't
is.
it? It's what happens between the 2 points. Yeah.
I picked up your book, Anna, and I was immediately excited by it. So you start the book with, I dedicate this book to you because you deserve far more than to spend your whole life living a half life.
Yeah.
Why do you think so many of us are not living a full life?
Because we're scared. Because we place, and we give so much fear, and we place so much emphasis on people liking us and getting things right and doing things well and avoiding bad things happening, and we want to micromanage and control everything, and it keeps us really small because we don't try stuff, or we filter ourselves so as not to displease people. We kind of chameleon ourselves into situations because we don't want to disrupt everything. We end up living really small, and I just don't want to get to my deathbed and be like, I haven't lived properly because I haven't been myself. And I think that happens all too often, you know, and I don't want to wait until I'm like, I was going to say grey, more grey. My kids are like, you're getting grey hairs. I know, I need to diet. I've got more than you can see. But I don't want to wait for age to bring me the wisdom so that I don't care so much about these things. You know, I feel like we deserve to live a fuller, less fearful life now. And we're trying to please more people than ever before because we're being watched and having more feedback than ever before. So instead of just trying to be a good person to those few people around us who know us really well, we're trying to be that to people that we do not even know and have never even met. And it's too much, and it's unsustainable, and it's keeping us really, really small.
How much of our value do you think that we put into that, like caring for people that don't know us because of social media? I feel like, especially in our world, and I think that's a big part. Like sometimes you'll get that negative feedback, and you're like, oh shit, that's the one that really hurts me.
It really hurts, doesn't it? And actually, I've remembered one of the uncomfortable truths that I didn't list, and it's a huge one. It's people will misunderstand me. People won't get me. And I think, you know what, one day I got a message on, it was a reply on a comment on a post that I'd done, and it said, I used to think Anna Mathur was an overprivileged toff who couldn't handle motherhood, right? And it was, my heart started racing. I had this shame response, like a really physical response where I'm like, I need to message her. I need to tell her about myself. I need to tell her about my childhood. I need to explain why all of this isn't right. And I need to win her round, and I need to change her mind. And actually, I thought if I tried to do that to everyone that misunderstood me, I would never, we've lost the value of feeling misunderstood and got by the people closest to us who actually have seen us and stood beside us and walked through the fire with us. Like, those are the people whose feedback should matter. Everything else is just commentary. Everything else is subjective. Everything else is like writing a review on a holiday to a place you've not even visited. Like, we wouldn't book an Airbnb based on a review written by someone that hadn't even been to the country. So why are we letting it have so much power?
In the introduction to the book, you talk about how in your 20s and early 30s that you were a people pleaser, essentially, and that drove a lot of your behaviours and potentially affected mental health and so on. How did you create awareness around that chapter and then start to evolve that behaviour to be where you are now?
I think it's getting to these different points in life where we realize we're so burnt out and resentful because we are just trying to please everyone around us. You know, my diary would be absolutely full of saying yes to people and doing things, and I do it resentfully. So I'd turn up to maybe help a friend move house, and I'd think, oh my gosh, you have no idea what this is costing me. I am tired, I'm overworked, I've said yes to too many things at work, I've got nothing in the tank. I'm going to go home and just like fall into a heap. So I was doing things out of kindness, but it would come with resentment. And then I would need to feel like they were really pleased with me. So that would put pressure on that other person. And I once heard people pleasing described as people pleading, because we think it's really altruistic and we think it's really kind, but it's really tainted by this need to get something back. And yeah, I would just repeatedly hit burnout and just want to retreat and hide and then pick myself up and just go and give myself away again. And I think having kids, that just becomes so much harder to do, right? Because you get home, you can't retreat. Everything is coming at you. And you can't please everyone and you can't do right by everyone when you're a parent. Otherwise, you won't end up parenting in a way that actually is aligned with who you are. You'll just be doing it because you're being observed. So I just had to start living it out, and it felt incredibly uncomfortable because it would mean saying no to things. When everything in me just wanted to say yes and deal with the consequences later. But I was living more authentically and realizing that the right relationships can withstand that.
I think it's the difference of coming for love versus coming with love.
Yeah.
And if it feels so right and you want to help someone because it's your truth in your heart is compelling you to do something, very different to, as you say, people pleading, where you're actually trying to get something back. And that's, in some ways, as you said, a form of two-way manipulation, I guess.
Yeah.
Personally, just going to the point where we become parents, I found that a very, very wonderful moment in my life because I just said no to everyone else at that point, and I became such a social recluse for the first year or two, and then realised that I actually didn't really have much of a social scene there. Moved out of London, said no to everybody, and neglected a lot of those kind of external
it was hard work getting you to do this.
Yeah, we've clawed it back.
Yeah.
We've clawed it back, though. In your years working professionally and talking about these 10 uncomfortable truths, what are the top 3? What are the ones that pop up that you see time and time again?
Yeah, some people won't like me. You know, I think if we can find an acceptance of the fact that some people just won't like us, and that's actually so often nothing to do with this at all. So an example of that is I had a friend at uni. She wasn't really a friend because she didn't want to be friends with me, and I couldn't work out why. I just thought she didn't like me, and it really bothered me. I was probably then a bit too much, trying to kind of win her over. And one night, after a few too many, I don't know what it was, Sambuca, like VK cherries back in 2004, she turned to me and she goes, "Anna, I've just worked out why I don't like you." And I was just like, well, there we go. You've said it. You didn't like me. I knew it. You've just proven it. And she said, it's because you remind me of my cousin who wasn't nice to me. And I thought, wow, there is absolutely nothing I could do about that. Or there's nothing I could have done to know that that's why you weren't kind to me. And it really is one of those moments of realization that what other people think about us is so often so little to do with us at all. We just view each other through the lenses, scratch lenses, basically. So it starts chipping away at the power of what other people think. And I think this one is so important in parenting because people will judge your parenting. If I wrote The Uncomfortable Truths of Parenting, it would be like, people will judge your parenting. Let's not constantly try and reassure us that, Matt, no one's judging your parenting, Matt. No one, no, Lawrence, no one's. Do you know what? They will. Yeah. They are. People are thinking all sorts of things about your parenting. But so why don't we just accept that people will be judging us? So let's not be fearful. Let's just parent in line with how we want to and what's right for us and our kids. And that's really liberating.
How have you changed since becoming a parent?
Oh my gosh. I've had my people-pleasing and my perfectionism slowly wrenched away from me with each kid.
So how many children do you have?
3.
You have 3?
Yeah.
Wow. Respect.
Respect.
Yeah, massive respect.
5, 8, and 9, they are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they are now all at school.
Yeah.
And that's a game changer. But I was very much type A personality, highly perfectionist, got all of my identity out of what I did and what people thought of me and how useful I was to the world. And my first kid, he was pretty straight down the line. Like, it was like he'd read the books. So I thought I was doing an amazing job. I was like, right, I am smashing this. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to copy and paste because I've obviously got it down to a T. And then my second one, he just completely humbled me. He showed me that actually it was little to do with me at all. But I thought it was all my fault. So he wouldn't do any of the things that the book said. And I thought, well, I'm probably getting it wrong then. And how can I be a good therapist if I'm feeling so awful about I was so exhausted and he had reflux and we didn't know why. And I just thought that was my fault. And I was forced to let go of the perfectionism. I had it literally like grabbed out of my hands because nothing went to plan, nothing. Yes, and realised that I needed people, that I couldn't do this on my own, that I needed to let people near me in.
It's a huge degree of surrender, isn't it, across the board?
So much surrender.
You know, mentally, physically, practically, just letting go.
Yeah. And my husband, it was really painful for him because he wanted to help, and I wouldn't let him. So I just felt like it was all my job, like feeding, that was really rough. So there wasn't like anything he could do. And I used to ask him to sleep in the spare room, which was upstairs and didn't even have a door on, right? As our son, he had reflux, so he screamed all night. So I think that was really hard for him because I wouldn't even let him stay in the room with me. And I remember the one night, and it was just, I was getting some nights 45 minutes sleep. And I would hallucinate. I didn't even know my own name. Like, I shouldn't have been behind the wheel of a car. It was absolutely awful. And I remember one night going up to him and saying, you need to come be with me. And I think for him, that was like a massive relief. He wasn't getting any sleep anyway up there, but just to come down and for me to allow him to be there with me and to let go of the perfectionism and that sense of I need to be doing this all right, and almost being ashamed for him to see me in a state. So, yeah, I was really humbled. I needed people, and that served me well.
I remember that chapter so well, the sleeping in the spare room and going through those kind of dark nights where everything feels like a bit of a blur and constantly in this anxious state because life is still ticking over during the daytime. You still have work and things like that to go to. In terms of dads who might be going through that now, what bit of advice could you give them to help their partners out a bit?
I think if you've got a partner who is so resolute in the don't worry, I'm fine, don't worry, I'm fine, it's probably because their identity is so tied up in just trying to get it right. And they feel like if they relinquish a bit of control, if they let someone step in and support them, then that's somehow failure. So I think if you can speak to that part of them, that would be amazing, just to have that conversation and say, it takes a village, and sometimes we can wonder where that village is, but actually it's right there. We just can't access it because we've got that association with allowing people. I'm a therapist. Like, I was literally helping people, but that was my comfort zone, helping, not being helped. But I think in terms of if you've got another kid, maybe just entertaining that child so that the mum's focus can be on the baby, making sure that some of those other kind of more practical jobs are maybe fulfilled. So getting a cook order, or, just trying to keep on top of stuff quietly so that it's almost, it doesn't feel, because I think I would have felt guilty if my husband was kind of taking over some of those jobs. This is how distorted it can be. And when you're tired, it's really hard to kind of rationalize these things. You can't see the wood for the trees. So yeah, I think speaking to that part of her that might be feeling like a failure and letting you in, and quietly taking care of some of the more practical things. Yeah.
What advice? It's interesting you say, because I think we have a lot of people that come on, and most people find the first few stages being a parent really tough. What advice would you give to any parents who are kind of just going into that phase? Maybe they're kind of going into the trenches. Perhaps they've started to drift a little bit. They're not really communicating like they used to. Because I feel like if you get the relationship right, it's so strong and it's so integral to everything else around it. But if you two drift, like I've got personal experience of doing that, it's just like passing ships in the night. And I think it would be great just to give the listeners something just to help their relationship rather than just talking about the baby.
Yeah, and I've absolutely been there, and it's really hard not to be there. I think it's really hard to focus on your relationship when it's all just logistics and you're tired and you're grumpy, and it can so easily become like a tired off and who's got more, you know.
Well, you got 3 hours last night, did you? Ooh,
lucky you. Yeah. You know, and I used to feel resentful of my husband going on the train to work because he could sit on the train.
Yeah.
And you're not containing as much. And I think, do you know what? I think a really good way of looking at it is if you are sat on the sofa together, just like you guys are right now. Imagine, there we go. Yep, we're living
We're
it.
at the touching stage.
So it's progressing fast. So any challenge that you have, any issue that you have, imagine, so often what we do is it's in the middle between us, and we're kind of like attacking each other, and we're attacking the thing, and it's, you know, we're feeling really misunderstood. And I think often it is that sense of being misunderstood. You don't get what it's like to be me. I don't get what it's like to be you. And imagine taking that issue, whatever it might be, that something wasn't done. Maybe it's that you keep leaving the mugs by the dishwasher instead of putting it in the sodding dishwasher. Let's put that on the table and look at it together, because we're on the same team. No matter how much it feel like we're against each other right now, we are on the same team. So you put this thing on the coffee table, and then you're both talking about it from the same vantage point. And I think it's thinking about the wider meaning, right? So it might be the coffee mug next to the dishwasher, not in the dishwasher. What does that actually mean? Because it's not really just about that. It might be that I feel overlooked. I feel like you're taking me for granted. I feel like you're just assuming I'm going to put it in the dishwasher. And it's starting to think about what is the wider message of this. And the other thing I think that's been so helpful for us is realizing that you're both done in different ways. So I might be massively touched out and then wanting to sit on the other side of the sofa whilst, you know, we used to be a lot more affectionate with each other. I used to worry, and he probably used to worry, why does Anna not want to hug me anymore? Why is she literally kind of like scooting so far up the sofa she's almost on the floor? And I think recognise that I was touched out from being mauled by kids all day and feeding, whereas he was going to work, not really touching anyone, hopefully, beyond a squash leg on the train, or, you know, shaking someone's hand in the office.
Really enjoying that cramped tube ride.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
whatever turns you on,
absolutely. But it's realising that you're both full up and overflowing in completely different ways. And I think we can get into this kind of tally chart situation where you've been out for 2 nights, I haven't been out at all, when actually what I might want might not actually be to go out at all. I might just want a bath on my own. So when we start kind of thinking that your needs and my needs are comparable and tallying them off against each other, we're often overlooking the fact that what that might look like for each of us might be really different. So it's not a competition. It's that we all have different, like our cups are all filled in different ways, and one of mine might be empty and his might be full. So it's recognizing the differences there as well.
I think ultimately you just want to be heard by your partner, don't you? And not making it a battle. But that's really helpful.
Gosh, I'm a repeat dishwasher offender, and now I realise it was never about.
It was never about the cup. But have that
I'm
conversation.
the one who gets angry at not putting the cup in the dishwasher.
Have that conversation.
Dishwasher offender.
It's true as well. So the context is different. You're both having the same experience of being parents, but the context that you're coming to it from is so completely different. And just being able to almost, the old adage, put yourself in your partner's shoes, or just see it from that perspective, have that compassion to melt whatever it is that you're feeling, again, just opens up the doors for communication, which is always the big thing we keep coming back to.
Yeah. And my husband used to say to me when I'd get frustrated, he'd be like, Anna, do you want me to live your life? Like, because that's the only way that I could really understand what it would feel like to be you. Like, do you want me to give up my job and just be at home with the kids? Do you? And we, you know, in saying that, we'd recognise that we're never going to fully understand each other's experience. We're not, because we're experiencing it through layers and lenses and filters and experiences that we've both had all our lives from before we even met. So sometimes there's a grief, actually, in knowing that I'm always going to have a different experience to parenting than my husband. He is never, as much as he might try and understand and empathise, he is never going to fully understand what it feels like to be me. So we will always misunderstand each other to some degree. And I think sometimes there is such an urge to feel totally got, when actually we're never fully gonna get each other. And that's okay.
Because you always kind of feel like your experience is worse, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I've noticed that. You kind of go, well, surely nothing could be worse than what I'm feeling right now. So
that victim consciousness comes in, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit about anxiety. I feel like it's something that as a kid growing up, I had no idea what this is. I don't know if it's something that's like just slipped into the zeitgeist now and that everybody talks about it. Are we more aware of it? I'm definitely aware of it now because I've been told to be aware of it. I'm aware that I'm aware. But I struggle with anxiety. I think a lot of people do these days. What advice do you give to clients or kind of any parents who are, grasping with, and they wake up, something's feeling in their stomach, like, here we go again, I've got anxiety about something. Do we need to get into the deeper root of it as to why it's come there? We speak a lot on this show about, like, things like ice baths and saunas, and all these things are great. But I've thought about this a lot recently. It's like, yeah, they're great, but what are we trying to cover up ultimately through these ice baths and these saunas? Do we have a wound under there that we're just putting a plaster over? How do you heal us, basically? Anna,
Okay.
I'm
with you.
Heal us.
Heal our anxiety.
Okay, I will do my best. I'll at least explain it. So anxiety in and of itself, like, it's a part of being human. We kind of need it. It's actually our, when it works well, it's our friend. It's like the zebra at the watering hole that hears the lion in the distance and is suddenly like, okay, what's going on here? Stops drinking the water, just, pupils dilate, like the blood starts kind of rushing, adrenaline, cortisol, all of that ready to kind of flee. And that's needed, because if that mechanism didn't happen, then probably more likely to get eaten. But the healthy thing is that once that roar of the lion just kind of disappears off into the distance, the zebra literally, like, visibly just calms and carries on drinking the water. So that is how it should work. Like, when I'm walking down, like, around my development, kids are on the scooters and the bikes, they go around the corner, I hear a car, suddenly I'm filled with, like, adrenaline. I need to rush around the corner, make sure they're safe. They're fine. That abates. That's all good working order. What happens is so often that we become so fearful of things that haven't even yet happened, may never happen, and it just begins to, this mechanism is kicking off when we're just sitting there watching TV because we've connected with something. We've jumped into a story that we've seen the minute we're watching New Amsterdam on Netflix. So, all of these kind of awful medical situations that I'm like, oh, I hadn't heard of that illness before. Right, I'm going to store that. That's another one to be worried about. Yeah, I'll be getting that one. So I'm going to be looking out for symptoms now. And we know so much more than ever before. We go on social media and we could get our hearts broken like 20 times in 5 minutes, So we've never been so aware of.
May, bless her.
Yeah.
Sorry,
We
do you not know about this?
No, I didn't.
I love you that you don't know about this. It's all the girls were talking about in my house.
No.
It doesn't matter. Anyway, I'll tell you about it after.
Okay. So yeah, that's what's happening, is that this mechanism is just kicking off because our bodies cannot just think, oh, it's false alarm. She's just going off on one in her head again. We'll just chill. Like, our body needs to respond. It's kind of, it's an inbuilt mechanism. And I think if we've ever been through something that is slightly traumatic, or it is one of those worst case scenarios. So when I was 10, I lost my sister to cancer. And I speak about this in the book because what that did, it taught me that the bad things happen. The worst case scenarios do happen. So then if we've been through something really challenging, we haven't processed it properly and got to a place of safety again, we can find it really hard to reassure ourselves that it's probably going to be fine. And I think it's that little childish part in us that just we want someone to come along, put their hands on our shoulders, look us square in the eye and promise us that it's going to be okay. But we know deep down that bad things happen, that we lose people that we love. So how can we find a way to live fully in knowledge of the fact that some of these things we fear can and may happen? And I don't know about you, but love feels like the most vulnerable thing that I've ever done. Like sometimes I remember looking at my kids and just thinking, I wish I didn't love you, because it feels like the riskiest thing I've ever done. It's definitely the bravest thing we do, I think, because the more we love, the more vulnerable we are. You know, the more we jump in there, the more risk we take, right? And I remember saying to my mum, having lost her daughter, because that's one of my greatest fears, my deepest fears, and I'm sure yours too. I remember saying to her, do you wish that you just never had a third child, because then you wouldn't have had to go through that pain? And she said, Anna, I would never give up a single day of loving her. It was worth it all. And I often think about this because as parents, we love hard. We can't help ourselves as much as we want to try and protect ourselves sometimes. We want to protect ourselves from pain, but we know we're vulnerable in our love. So cognitively, we can try and do everything we can to keep them safe, to keep us safe. But what we end up doing is just making our lives small again. You know, we want to wrap them up in cotton wool, but how are they going to experience adventure and take risks and live fully? And how are we as parents going to have the joy of watching them do that and find ways to live our lives fully too? And so when I look at them, I just think of what my mum said, and I think there's like, love is worth the risk. And I think it's also really helpful to remember that there are people who have walked through the fires of your nightmares, like my mum has walked through mine, and they're thriving and they're doing okay. And it's not the end of the world. It might be the end of the world as you know it, but it's not the end of the world. And I think we can become so fearful of the worst case scenarios that we can't imagine a life beyond them. But there are people living beyond them everywhere, thriving. And I think, again, it's these little things that can help anchor us as those anxieties arise and think, you know, that hasn't happened. It may never happen. But in the worst case, if it did happen, I could be okay. I can be okay. And I find that with my clients and with myself, you know, those thoughts are really helpful because they're not like, it's never going to happen. They're like, bad things happen. But it's worth living and loving and taking risks and jumping in with both feet because it will be worth it all.
Gosh, that's so beautiful.
Gosh, you had me going then. That was. Do you think that has shaped you who you are today? Like the career path that you've done, being able to talk about uncomfortable truths, going through that at such a young age?
Yeah, I think it actually made me kind of want to wrap myself up in cotton wool and want to make the world a safer place for myself as possible by being nice to everyone, whatever the cost, by having no boundaries, because I didn't want to disappoint everyone. I wanted to be so kind and easy and neat that I almost didn't know who I was beyond that. And it wasn't sustainable. It was empty and I was fearful. So if anything, like going through all of that and seeing all the grief and trauma around me, I just wanted to be the nicest, kindest, easiest daughter. I didn't want to add to anything. So what I've had to do is this kind of undoing of all of that and this kind of ungrowing of actually being like, you know what? My needs are valid. My dreams, my desires, my need for support, my messiness, my, you know, all of this, my adventure, my voice. I need to find all of that again. And in that, I had to just really realize that, you know, I can't wrap myself up in cotton wool and the people that I love. Bad things are going to happen. I'm going to lose people. I'm going to hurt people if I speak my truth, because sometimes it is disruptive when we're honest, you know, but healthy relationships can withstand healthy boundaries. So really, it kind of kept me small, but now I'm like disrupting all of that. And that's where this uncomfortable truth is, that if we're going to live fully, like it's not going to be comfortable, but we can't live wholly when we're trying to be comfortable.
Kind of reminds me of this armoring as we go through life and the different seasons of life. And there's feels like for lots of us, there's a season where we start putting the armor on because we're experiencing all these things, good and bad, that life presents to us. But eventually there, for many people, there's a tipping point where you realize actually, and through these uncomfortable truths, you have to start removing those layers and start opening up your heart again so that you can live as fully aligned to your truth as possible.
It makes you vulnerable.
Can we talk a little bit about inner dialogue? There's a section of that in the book, and about how we can create a kinder inner dialogue. You know, I hear people say you wouldn't speak to your best friend like that. Why do you talk to yourself like that? What advice would you give to anybody who perhaps has an inner dialogue that isn't serving them?
Yeah. So I'd imagine turn it into a person. Imagine that person was outside of you. What would it be like to have them around? If they were following you around, kind of externally talking at you in the way that you talk to yourself. And some people can't identify their internal dialogue. When I start talking to them about this, they might say, you know, I don't really have that. It's okay. Well, what happens if you were to drop like 4 pints of milk on the kitchen floor? You know, what would you say to yourself? And they might say, oh, you idiot. It's like, okay, well, that's your inner dialogue there. And so starting to try and externalize that and think, what would it be like if that was my teacher? What would it be like if that was my parent? You know, what would happen to my self-esteem and my confidence, or my child's, if I was to talk to them in the way that I speak to myself? And the answer is often, it would destroy their self-esteem. I would never talk to my child in that way. It would destroy their confidence. And that's what's consistently happening within us. And this is why it is so unbelievably life-changing and powerful when we start challenging that internal dialogue, because we can't control what jumps into our mind, right? If I drop the milk and I say, oh, you idiot, that's just automatic. But what I can do is think about an alternative way of responding to myself, which might be like, oh dear, that's not a deal, better clear it up. These things happen, right? It's much more diplomatic. It's much more neutral. And as you start kind of feeding in that second one, and it's intentional, it's a bit exhausting, you start becoming super aware and like, oh my gosh, why did I just say that to myself? What else would I say? So initially it's really intentional and it's hard work. But what happens, and this does happen, is that more intentional dialogue, that warmer, kinder or more neutral dialogue just starts kind of overshadowing the more critical internal dialogue. And honestly, like, it's life-changing. Absolutely, like, fundamentally life-changing, because that internal conversation is the single most important conversation you will ever have. It informs everything, where you set your boundaries, how you allow people to speak to you. Because if you're bullying yourself, if someone's cruel, you're not really going to pull them up on it, because it kind of feels a bit more comfortable than someone being kind. So it informs everything.
That reminds me of two things. So firstly, for years I had this kind of OCD leaving the house, where I'd have to check, you know, the cooker, the taps even, and everything. And I came to the point of realization it's because, you know, there was a sort of loss of confidence or not trusting myself. And I started to, instead of going around double checking or triple checking everything sometimes before I left and just kind of really trying to focus in on it, I got to the point where I was like, you freaking got this. It's okay, back yourself. I'm just going to walk out the freaking front door. Which sounds like an easy thing to do, but it isn't if you're kind of stuck in that kind of OCD rut. And then eventually, just again, as you say, the voice that tells you can because you did and you have and you always do overcomes the voice that tells you that you can't and that you're going to fail and that you're going to fall short. That's point number one. Okay, I've got more.
You always do.
Point number two was, I love what you said about making it a person, the internal dialogue. I actually did that for my anxiety. And I saw my physical anxiety as this kind of evolutionary mechanism, which is very old school, very backdated. As you said, it's got that fight or flight mechanism in which the nervous system dials up. And I started to picture it as a young boy who doesn't know any better, you know, because it's such an early evolutionary mechanism, and we have advanced to a point now where, you know, we are beyond the need for that to be so chronically activated. I would almost look at it endearingly and say, "Oh, it's that child. It doesn't know any better. It's just trying to keep you safe. He's just trying to do his best.
Just scared, probably.
And that's it." And eventually, I kind of started to look at it almost lovingly as a kind of sweet little boy that's inside me, and not allowing it or not giving it the lead quite so much. And that was a bit of a game changer.
Stuff. Game changing. Brilliant.
That's perfect. I remember when I was going through therapy, I used to escape and I would drink, and I remember my therapist saying that there's two versions of you, Matt. There's the Matt who wants to be the nice guy and do all of this, but there's also like the devil on your shoulder. And that was the first time I'd heard that. And it's interesting now that, because I mean, I was one of the first out of my group of friends to have a child. So a lot of my friends would still be out and living their single lives and doing this and doing that. And I almost had this sense of resentment. I think when I first came into the world, I was like, oh, I miss not going out and drinking and doing all that, but I just miss my own independence. But when she said that, look, you've got these two versions of yourself, instead of fighting back against them, it's just understanding a little bit. And it's almost like that inner child. It's like, I want to go out and do this, but perhaps it's not going to serve me. It's like, I really like that. It's just listening to that voice and going, not tonight. You don't want to hang over tomorrow.
That's why you.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah.
I know the name of that persona. I know that guy.
Yeah, we call him Dylan.
Yeah,
because we're both, Lawrence is very Welsh and I'm half Welsh, so Dylan Thomas was notoriously a big drinker. So
yes,
we go, is Dylan coming out? And I'm like, no, Dylan's being a good boy tonight. But I remember she said that and I was like, because I always felt like, what's the problem with me? Is it me that's the problem that just wants to go out? And it's listening and it's surrendering to that other side of it. And I found that really helped. So I'm glad to hear that you did that as well.
Yeah. That was a great tip. And I also love a good analogy.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear your dam analogy. What happens to us when we suppress emotions?
Yeah, because it's like energy. We can feel it, right? We can feel, if you think about anger, you can feel how physical it is. It literally rises
Mine's
up
in my
and you're
stomach.
like, same.
Like butterflies.
And then it starts turning into like fire, and then it's like the Hulk. So emotions are energy. And if you think about labor contractions, you know, they start rising, they peak, and then they drop and they ease off. And I think often what happens with emotion is we recognize it start going out. We're recognizing it, that it's there and we're feeling it. And then when it gets to the peak, we do something. Like, I will literally be having a tense conversation with my husband and my hand will just be searching the sofa for my phone because I just don't want to think about it anymore. I want to feel differently. I want to escape. Or it might be that, you know, you get to the end of the day and you just think, well, I'm going to have a drink. I don't want to feel like this anymore. Or you recognize frustration and there are just so many ways like of zoning out and numbing and switching it off and just trying to but what we do then is like we sweep it under the carpet and then the carpet gets lumpy. You know, it doesn't disappear anywhere. I wish they
it's like you work in therapy.
I know, who'd have thought? But they don't just disappear and dissipate. They don't just go, okay then, bye, and off they go. It's
bigger and bigger.
They're within us. And, you know, the dam analogy is like that contraction. That wave is reaching the peak and we're like, no, thank you. And it's still there and it's building up pressure. And then things start coming out sideways. Like the dam might have a little like brick missing and then it's like spurting out. And it might come out, you know, in the cereal box falling out the cupboard and suddenly you're like livid about it. When actually...
that happened to me with Weetabix.
Weetabix.
Yeah, it was Weetabix. I dropped a box of Weetabix
it's got snow.
I drop-kicked it.
It goes everywhere. I
hadn't slept for a week. I just remember kicking this box.
And
I was like,
course,
what am I doing?
of course.
It's the Weetabix dust.
The dust, and then if it gets wet, it turns into concrete and it's just a big problem. But that's it, is that we can get this emotional displacement. It might come out in, you know, it could come out in any way, in the way that you're speaking to people. It might come out in the fact that you drive off 5 minutes and suddenly you're like, you know, you've got your hand on the horn and you're like doing all signs out the window at someone that just made a little error. And we can think, what's wrong with me? Why am I being like this? When actually it's probably because we're feeling worried or anxious or scared or overwhelmed or unheard or misunderstood. And, you know, again, it's a bit like that when I was talking about the mug on the side. You know, it's often speaking to something else that's going on that hasn't been addressed. So we can really learn to trust that those emotions will peak and then subside. But it takes bravery in being like, I'm just going to sit this one out and see what happens. I'm going to leave it 5 minutes until I grab my phone. Maybe even put a timer on your watch or something. I'm going to leave it 2 hours, 1 hour until I go and get that glass of wine. And what you'll often find is that once you ride through the peak of that contraction, the peak of that wave, is that it's abated. You don't need to kind of numb it as much, and you grow in confidence in that.
I love that, because the phone is an easy one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like a slight moment of uncomfortableness, I'll just reach for it, and then it dampens it, and then you do it again. So the advice you give to somebody perhaps who's going through that at the moment and they're reaching for their phone to cover something, maybe just sit with that feeling.
Just challenge yourself to wait a few minutes longer. Just start maybe going over the peak and then think, right, I'm going to do it now. And what you might find is that in time, you just become more trusting that wave. Because we've been going through grief. So last year was just so much pain. And I'd been writing this book, so it was all so clear in my mind. So I was just trying to feel the feelings, and it was excruciating at points. Excruciating. I thought, I cannot humanly deal with this amount of pain. But in time, I realised that I could. You know, in time, I realised that we can withstand so much. And the thing to remember is that just like labour contractions, they're productive. Each one, you don't have to do that exact one again. It served a purpose. And I think with emotions, whilst uncomfortable, and at the peak of it, you think, I cannot do this, just like I would have shouted out at points in labour. And I felt like, and I probably did shout out last summer, I can't do this. And then you are, and you can, and it strengthens you, and starts giving you confidence that maybe I can withstand this. And our culture pushes us to comfort, right? Which is why I think people are doing the ice baths, and I think people are seeking out the discomfort. I went in a cryo chamber last week. Have you ever done that?
Oh, yeah,
Minus 85 degrees. It was so mad.
Yeah, they're intense.
My hair was like icy. But, you know, it teaches us that we can withstand this stuff.
And I want to ask you about boundaries as we get to the end, because I think this is a big one for people. And the bit in the book where you talk about your friend who would go to the gym and constantly have someone come over and talk to him.
Oh, yeah.
And he just got to the point where, you know, he wasn't doing a workout. He had an hour and 40 minutes of it was being filled with chat, and he couldn't quite bring himself to set that boundary, which, by the way, this is the reason I have 3 gym memberships. So I'll just keep moving up. I'm serious, because I know there's one, if I go there, it's highly unlikely I'll actually
do a workout.
Anyway.
Oh, man, that's expensive.
So David Lloyd Rains Park.
Yeah.
How can people set healthy boundaries in their life in a way that serves them without offending other people?
I think you will offend people sometimes. You know, you can articulate things, and it sometimes literally is the case of just bracing yourself to have a conversation. And knowing that person may not understand why you find that hard, why you don't want to do that anymore, or why you just want to cut off conversation and go and do your workout. They might be offended, but you're being authentic, and you're not going to resent them whilst you're having that conversation. Because I think that, you know, that can often be there. It's like, I don't want to be here doing this with you right now. So it enables you to be more authentic. So when you are stopping and chatting, you're doing it out of a place of, actually, I want to stop and chat with you right now. So I think start to recognise where that boundary is being crossed, because for many of us, we're so used to kind of just letting people steamroll them that we don't even recognise when we feel uneasy about something. And then sometimes talk to someone and think and let them know, like, this is what's going on. How would you word it? And I might say, right, you know what I'd say in that situation is, it's so good to chat to you, but I'm so limited on time, so I'm going to go and start my set now. Nice to see you. And then just walk off. And what you start realising is that people normally okay with it. Like, there might be a bit like, oh, he's normally nice and chatty, but, you know, you've given a reason and off you've gone. And I think it just enables you to have more authentic relationships where there isn't that resentment and impatience kind of just under the surface. And people, to the main, can cope. And those who can't, well, maybe that relationship isn't one to invest in.
Well, something I've started doing is saying, I love you so much, but fuck off. And then
simple and effective.
Seems
and
to feel okay after that.
Oh my God, that tickled me. Yeah. You're on fire today, Lawrence.
Thank you.
Anna, you've given us so many amazing analogies today, but one thing I just want to finish us on, if that's okay, is guilt and parent guilt.
Yeah.
I watched your TED talk on this, which was really brilliant. And I'm a dad. Sometimes I just feel guilty when I leave my wife at home with the little one, when I just need a bit of me time. Why do I feel this guilt, and how can I overcome it?
I think you feel that guilt because for 2 reasons. 1, you're doing something wrong, or 2, you believe you're doing something wrong. So I think it's really helpful to identify, am I doing anything wrong by going and getting some time to myself so that I can
golf for 6 hours. So
Probably
no,
are doing something
I have
wrong.
one of those at home now. I have one of those at home. He likes all the sports. I wish he'd pick one. Cricket's the worst, goes on forever. But am I doing anything wrong, or do I believe I'm doing anything wrong? Because sometimes maybe you are. Sometimes maybe it's a conversation to be had. You've been playing golf 6 days in a row now, and really you probably should face the facts. Face the music at home, and you're avoiding. And so sometimes, in which case there's a conversation to be had and things to be addressed. But actually, if it's just this sense that I'm doing something wrong, and I know I'm not, because I know my wife has given me the go ahead, I know that I'm going to make some time for her to go and do something for herself tomorrow if that's what she needs to do, then just feel the guilt and do it anyway. Because you know that you've got permission. You know from yourself and your wife, you know that it's okay, that guilt is probably just that sense of, I should be doing this. I should want to be with my kids all the time. I should be next to my wife all the time. I think
ultimately it comes from a place of good. It's like, I just want to feel like I'm serving them the best I can.
So have a conversation with your wife and say, are you okay with me going? Do you feel like, have that open dialogue? Because sometimes it might not feel okay. There's definitely been times when I've said to my husband, I am so done in with the kids, I actually don't think I'm going to parent them well tomorrow if you're not there all day. Like, I need backup. And if I'm able to be honest about that, then he's also then able to believe me when I'm like, go and play golf. Yeah. It's cool, I've got this. So sometimes, I
love that honesty. It's hard. It's an uncomfortable truth.
Yeah.
But that honesty is amazing.
And you'll never ask Jessie, because if she says no, it would devastate
I'll never ask. I'll just go. Devastate me too much.
Just keep your golf clubs in the car. I'm just going off to the shops.
Anna, thank you so much for coming in today. We always like to finish the show just with one question. Matthew, what is that question?
What is the best piece of parenting advice that you could give?
Oh, gosh. Do you know what? Turning I've got to I get to, which is a favourite of mine. So, I've got to do this. I've got to get the kids. I've got to take them to this. I've got to get up in the night. And I know it's hard and it's a slog and it's mundane and there's so much bloody washing. But there's an I get to in this. It's the privilege. And I think sometimes in the mundanity of it all and the relentlessness of it all, we can lose sight of the privilege of it. So there was a day, there was loads of washing. I was like, I've got to do another load of washing. And I was like, no, I get to. I get to wash these clothes in a house that I feel safe in, with kids that I dreamt of having, and these little clothes that we've been able to afford, which is all of this, and a washing machine that's like plumbed in. All of this is an immense privilege. It's boring and mundane, and it's a privilege, and both of those can exist. So, that's been an amazing tweak for me. The I get to.
I love that. And so lastly, where can people find you? Socials, where's the best place to go?
Just on Instagram. Everything tends to go from there, doesn't it? Anna Mathur. Thank you.
Great, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Anna.
Thank you.
I've loved it.
Thank you so much.